Hello everyone, welcome back. Sorry I missed my intro. All right, so did a lot of work off camera because it's kind of boring, and when you're fabricating stuff, it kind of takes a long time and it's hard to really show you what I'm doing without finishing it and then showing you. So anyways, what we got here, this is the stock assembly. This is the extremely modified, overly heavy, not really that great stock assembly. So as you can see, this is the part that sticks through the firewall, right? So the firewall bolts there. And then this used to have a rod on it for the carburetor, so when you push on the gas pedal, it would all just move as one. Well, I attached this piece, which is an old exhaust hanger, drilled a hole in it, and that was where the cable would go through the firewall, right? So you push down on the pedal and it pulls it that way. Well, it was always pulling it at a weird angle, and then this was like at the top, right? So it was like right there. So it would come off every once in a while, and this bolts to the floor, which is old and weird. So I bought this kit. Not where I bought it from and not the price I paid, but it's for a 68 Nova. And that, I had the hopes that it would just go in and be perfect. Well, that was not the case, but it's changed quite a bit. So this actually was on the other side, and it was up higher, as you can see right there. So I tried bending it and I tried getting it kind of close to where I needed, and then I figured out that the wiper arm is like right here, right? So as this is up in the car, the wiper arm just kind of goes like right around it. So I had to cut that arm off, had to put it to the other side. I had to rotate it in that way. I had to shorten it, right? It used to be a little bit longer. And after a lot of trial and error, this is like perfect. So, and this also used to have this stainless piece on it that did not match my other pedals, as you can see there. So I took it off. So let's go put this in and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so the stock one was metal. The aftermarket one was plastic. Metal, better for me here. So we left that guy in there. Fortunately, everything just kind of slides right in. So that's there. And then up in here, we have the attachment point there. And I'm just gonna slide her on there so you can see. But you see how close the arm is. Now that's the lowest portion. It's kind of in the middle of the windshield, but I wanted to put it there so I had a reference point. So I think what I'm gonna do, the cable's gonna shorten up a bit. Get this into focus. Cable's gonna shorten up a bit. It's probably gonna start like right there. And that's gonna put me, maybe not the same plane, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was. The gas pedal was probably like, see if I can show you. Gas pedal's probably like this, but it was straight up and down, right? So you had to like put your heel all the way in because the bottom portion of the pedal was there. Anyways, this should be a hell of a lot better. And I welded it pretty good. A lot of good solid tacks on there, so I don't think this is ever gonna break. And it's just gonna pull like that, like it should. So anyways, that's that. Moving on to the next thing. Yay. Hello. So it's a whole different day. We are working on the engine. So I just got the throttle pedal done, as you saw. Got you on time lapse. Basically, we're gonna try and knock in the cam bearings so that tomorrow I can really start getting assembled on this thing, because the cam bearings is the only thing I've never done before. So I'm gonna get to measuring, and then we will get these things thrown in and do a little hammering. Yeah. All right, so let's discuss what's going on here. So fortunately, I inherited a lot of my dad's tools, and he had some really high quality stuff. So I used these calipers to measure the old bearings for the cam and the new bearings that are going in, because I had no idea where this block came from or how much it was machined or if it had really bad issues. So I wanted to play everything safe. So once I figured out that the bearings were similar in size, I said, okay, let's put them on this new tool I've never used and let's pound them in. Well, that didn't go so well. All right, so as you just saw, we got one cam bearing put in. I put number 5 in first because it's in the back, and I was gonna work my way from the back forward. Well, I don't know if I just got like the shittiest tool in existence or what, but as you can see there, right where it splits, because it's the expanding type installer, I'll show you in a second, left witness marks where I was banging it in. So I just tried to throw an extra cam in there that I had, and it won't go past those marks, obviously, because they're pretty big. So now I'm gonna have to figure out a way to get those marks off. Ugh. Okay, so I have done what I can, right? So in here, let's see if I can get it in the light, right underneath where that oiling hole is, it was kind of kneeled over a little bit. Right at the 6 o'clock position, you can kind of see it there. And then on this side, right there. And on this side right there. So You could catch all of them with your nail, which is, you know, the gold standard. So I sanded them as carefully as possible, and the cam just slips right through and seems to spin fine. So being as how this is the rear bearing, I'm going to just do a better job on the next ones. And we're gonna pray for that guy and hope for the best. What I did wrong on the tool, when you tighten it down, this rubber expands, right? Well, I didn't have it tight enough, so what it was doing is it was getting up against this, this ledge here, and as you can see, when it expands, it splits. That's what was happening, is it was basically hitting up against that, and it was causing it to knurl the edge. So I'm an idiot, but we're gonna go with it. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching me struggle, because so far, of the 2 bearings I've installed, both have been a problem. So the first one, as we've already covered, I screwed up, but I kind of fixed it. The second one, I was doing really good. Everything went real smooth. And then on the last hit from this direction, I gave it 3 whacks instead of 2. Yeah, it drove it too far. So then I had to turn it over and do it the other way, because I'm kind of a perfectionist when it comes to weird shit sometimes. Let's see if I can show you this. Let me zoom in. Zoop. So we are just like 1/8 of an inch, maybe less, maybe a 1/16 of an inch off center for the oil galley. I'm gonna call that good, because I'm not gonna put the damn thing in and go the other way again. So that's where we're at. We are just on Struggle Street here. So we're gonna put it back on the stand, and we're gonna work on the third one. So wish me luck. Hopefully you're cheering for me, because the third one went in so smooth, it's almost perfect. All right, y'all, it's midnight. GoPro just shut off, which means that it's time to go. So I'm just gonna show you. The front one is the only one that I kind of gave up on. So I pounded this thing in quite a few times, and it's still not like 100% through the oil galley hole. It's kind of sticking out a smidge there. I mean, it's still there, but we're almost flush here on the outside, and it's past flush on the other side. So I'm gonna leave that one. I know it's getting oil, so I'm good with that. All the other ones are fine now that I went back and forth a couple times. You know, this definitely was my first time. That's for sure. So probably tomorrow what I'll do is I'll clean this extra cam that I have. This is a TSP 228 cam with a busted lobe. Yeah, it had a lifter turn and ate that one. Could it be fixed? Yeah, probably. That's why I never threw it away, but it's not going in any of my motors that I want. So I'll clean this up because it's got a bunch of dust and stuff on it, and I'll throw that in there to see what it feels like. That's a wrap for tonight. Beer in hand, off I go. All right, so let's do a little explanation. So as you saw just a few minutes ago on time lapse, I was just kind of fighting this cam in the block, trying to figure out what the heck was going on, and I think I have determined what is the problem. So once I put these bearings in, when you push them in there, they kind of squeeze down. They get, you know, a little oblong. So I was able to turn it, but it would kind of stop, and I'd turn it and it would stop, and I'd turn it and it would stop. And that's just the, you know, the out of roundness of the actual cam itself in the actual bearing surface, just kind of hitting a high spot and hitting a low spot. I thought maybe when I had installed everything that I screwed it up, right? Because this is my first time. I was using a shitty tool, which I'll be the first to admit, this is like almost the cheapest version that I could get. However, this is the one that I saw that people actually verified that they had used it and it had worked. I had watched videos on this particular model and found that it looked like a pretty simple process. I screwed up number 5 because I put the bearing too close to the collet. So when I was hitting it in, it was just bouncing off of the metal. It should be in a rubber encapsulation bushing, basically, so when you're pushing that thing in, it's never hitting metal. It's just rubber bearing block. So I screwed 5 up. Well, I figured since I screwed that one up, I probably screwed these other ones up too. And then the cam got stuck. It literally got stuck at one point. I had to force it. So I said, well, I must have screwed something up. And I went and I looked, and all the bearing surfaces looked pretty good except for 1 and 5. So I cleaned them up as much as I could, you know, in like the most caveman way that you could think of, but the cam still was not good on bearing 3, which looks visually perfect. So now I'm waiting on the Summit tool for installing bearings in an LS. As a particular one that everybody says to get, it's twice the cost, and I've already bought that one, but you know, it's fine. I want to do it right. And then I got the sealed power bearings and not the Durabond. So we will see when they get here. I will measure them. I'm going to be extremely upset if they show up and they are the same measurements and they still have the same problem, even with the right tool. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Unfortunately, I took the next week off to do all of this and try and get this into the car, and I'm not gonna be able to do that. So I'm just gonna start working on stuff on my list. Right now, I'm gonna work on the visors, because when I drive, my visors just go bloop. From what I've seen online, people say just take electrical tape, wrap it around there, and try and give it some bite when it's turning. So we'll see which one works. Well, lucky for me, when I was trying to fix the visor, I broke it. Basically, as you see in the picture, a little piece of plastic got wedged in there, and I mean, I just kept pulling in this direction, like directly towards the camera, not this way, and this piece snapped off. So clearly this stuff is not very strong. Could be that it's old as well, and it is old. But this one was really nice looking, and this one's like crap. So I'm gonna try and scrub this thing with, I don't know, maybe like some red Scotch-Brite, maybe some Neverdol, maybe some gasoline, who knows? We'll see what happens. Here's an update on the visor. So this piece broke off, right, as I was trying to take the visor out. I did have the screw out, by the way, I want to make that clear. And then this piece was the piece that actually goes on the shaft that's supposed to take up the distance so that it doesn't swing back and forth. Well, as you can see, it's just absolutely mangled. So, got rid of that. I did as the internet instructed, and I tried electrical tape. Then I tried 1 wrap of electrical tape, that didn't work. 2 wraps of electrical tape, that didn't work. So then I did basically 2 wraps, but I started off of the shaft, and then I did the length of it. And basically what I did was I overlapped the end. And what that does is once you actually insert it into the clamp, it doesn't come off. Because what was happening is every time you put it through there, it would just come right off, or it would ball up on the inside. So that shaft actually has a taper to it in the center, and that's to let the screw pass through. What would happen is it would all ball up into the center, and then it would only hinge from this point right here, which is not enough to hold it. Anyway, so the wrapping the length of it seems to have made a good difference. I'm not going to move this because I rarely ever use this thing, so I think once I do, it'll tear that tape. But for now, at least it's an option. So there's the update. All right, and instead of a traditional time lapse, I figured I'd just take some pictures and walk you through it. So I decided I need to check my wheel bearings before the trip, and I'm glad I did. So the seals on the rear of the actual hub were just toast, and they were letting in water. As you can see, there's clearly some water ingress. Luckily, I found it in time, and it didn't wipe out the bearing. Everything just needed cleaned real good. And then we got the sway bar bracket on the passenger side ended up being broken. So I had to contact Church Boys, and luckily they were able to send me a couple out, so that's good. And once that was sorted, we turned our attention to the hubs. So I cleaned them real good. I used gasoline this time on the inside, which was nice because I actually got a little metal shavings out of there from when it was original. I pressed out all the studs. With the ARPs, you have to kind of measure them up and cut them to your length. So once we got everything measured, we went ahead and cut them. I got them painted black, looking nice. And as they say, paint it black, put it back. So that's what we did. We packed all the wheel bearings. We got all the studs pressed in. We got the rotors cleaned up because the rotors started rusting as well on the hat. And then put everything back on the car. So at this point, we got it all bolted back up and moved on to the next issue, where if you look at the upper control arm, there's a shaft there that the coilover bolts to. I thought I had a squeak coming from the spring, but upon further inspection, it seems like it's the lower spherical bearing. Okay, so the cross mount that normally goes in this hole here, it has a spherical bearing. It's held in with some snap rings. So anyways, it goes on the top of the control arm, bolts like that, and then the control arm just goes up and down. Well, I was getting some squeak, and I've had the squeak for a little while, never really looked into it. Decided now's the time to look into it. Got a lot of play here, and this thing's actually welded onto the shaft, so I'm gonna see if I can get it off, see if I can get a replacement. But at this point, it's probably where my squeak's coming from. A little bit of PB Blaster and a hammer later, good to go. So while we wait for those parts to show up, it's time to work on the engine. So the first thing I had to do here was clean the rods. I had never cleaned them after taking them out, so I just had a little bit of gasoline, some scrubbing, a little bit of elbow grease. They came out perfect, and then moved my attention to the crank. So I wanted to do this right. I've never really taken the steps. I've used plastic gauge before, but I've never bought an actual dial bore gauge. And with the mindset that I need this engine to work immediately after being put in the car, I went ahead and I bought one. A little bit of adjustment later, it actually made repeatable measurements, which is exactly what you want. So then I said, okay, the crank's dirty, I got to clean the crank. So we did all that. And then I looked up how to actually use the bore gauge correctly. And that's one of the things about this, is if you already know what you're doing, this process takes a long time. If you don't know what you're doing, it takes way longer. Basically, I had to learn how to do it, how to make sure I was reading it correctly, seeing where I actually wanted to be, taking the measurements, and then figuring out how to get from point A to point B. And if you're doing this on your own for the first time, Real Street has a really good set of videos that just kind of walks you through the process. And they also have a paper that helps immensely, because you can write everything down, you can compare and contrast, and then you can figure out exactly what you need and where to go next. And speaking from experience, I used Plastigauge because I just didn't have the tools, and I was a little scared to just kind of dive that far into engine building. I kind of just went with everyone else and said, well, usually if you just slap an LS together, it'll be fine. I just don't have that kind of time to hope and dream that everything's going to be all right. So I needed to verify, and I'm honestly glad I did this, because it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. It was actually a pretty straightforward process once you understand what you're checking and why you're checking it and where it needs to be. So I highly recommend just kind of watching their videos, kind of seeing if you can understand the process, and then if you can, then proceed forward and just buy the tools. It's worth it. So as you can see, we got all the measurements done on the bottom end, and we started assembling the pistons and the rods. One of the things that I thought was super neat, my son recently got a 3D printer, and I found the file for a piston ring compressor. Unfortunately, the first one I printed was for a standard bore 5.3, and this one's been overbored by 10,000, so I had to reprint it with some adjustments. But the second one worked really well. Once oiled up, it actually worked great, just like you would buy from the store. I mean, it wasn't quite as smooth as, the machined ones, but for free, I mean, it was great. It was definitely worth the effort to print it out and make the adjustments. So here we are, we're in the disassembly stage, taking all the parts that I need for the new engine off the old engine, which is quite extensive. It's almost everything. The only thing left is a short block after that. So cleaning up the heads, one of the things I found was WD-40 works amazing. If you just spray it on there and give it a light scrubbing, everything literally just melts off. The only thing that couldn't get off was the RTV. Put a little brake cleaner on that, let it sit for a few seconds, hit it with a razor blade, and it just comes right off. So, you could do a lot worse. You could use gasoline or something, and it's pretty caustic and bad for you. I did use gas on the lifters and the rockers. Needed a good spray out, and I actually found that in the bottom of the container there was some metal shavings. Not a lot, they were very small, but there still was metal shavings. So it was good to clean all that stuff out and just have a fresh slate. So here I'm at the ending stages of disassembly. I needed the offset dowels off the old engine, so I had to heat them up because they were locked in with red Loctite. Once we got those out, it's kind of, just clean everything, reinstall it on the new engine. And one thing I do want to note as I slide the cam in here, I did receive the Summit LS cam bearing install tool and the sealed power bearings, and I put them in. I didn't record it because I didn't figure anybody would care. You've already seen it once. There was no issues whatsoever. I mean, it went in just like they should. They all, I did have to pound on it pretty hard, but I used a dead blow instead of an actual hammer, and I had no issues. And the next grueling part is pinning the crank. So previously I had created my own little tool, basically out of 4 washers welded together and 1/4-inch hole drilled in it. That works okay, it's just easy to get off center, and I had drilled one of the engines at an angle on accident. So I said, let's do this correctly. So I got the actual fixture off Amazon. I think it was maybe $60, but that made the world of difference. There was no way to get it off centered. It actually had a bushing in it so that you had to drill straight through. So once I got that done, moving on to the next items, head bolts, rocker arms, and all of this in anticipation of pressurizing the oil system as a prelude before we get the engine in the car. So let's explain that. All right, here's something cool I found on the internet. So take an old pressure sprayer, right, like you'd find for your garden. I clean this out with gasoline, brake cleaner, and a rag. So this is super clean. And then I just adapted this little hose to a barb fitting. Goes right into my oil pressure port. So I'm gonna pressurize it with this guy. I have about 2 quarts in here, stuff I had the lifters and the rockers and stuff sitting in. And basically what'll happen is you're gonna pre-lube the engine until you see oil come out of the push rods. I may have to add more oil. There's only like 2 quarts in there. And if you don't start seeing it right away, you can turn the engine over and just try and get it to push through. But in theory, this should work just like the tool you would pay for, and this was free. So let's see. So I just wanted to note a few things here. I originally put in 2 quarts. All of the oil had just gone somewhere. And when I was pressurizing it, I could hear it hissing, and I theorized that the bypass that's built into the oil pump was probably releasing the pressure, because I could hear it dripping into the oil pan, which is one of the reasons I swapped to the other port. I had put probably 4 quarts in it total by the time I actually saw it come out of the rockers in the next video, but as long as you got it in the right port, I think it would probably happen a little faster than that. All right, and after putting in the correct port, which is this guy here, I just swapped the ports top to bottom. As you can see, this guy's got some oil on it. So I think we're doing it right. It just takes a little while. And then that's the only one so far, but that one definitely has new oil coming out. So just gonna keep going and see what comes out. Yeah, you can actually see there's a little puddle there now. And in closing, I left the pressure on it for maybe 30 minutes, walked away, came back, and there was oil coming out of the other rockers. So I figured if it's at the top end, it's everywhere in the bottom end. And with the engine pre-lubed, that basically buttons it up. There's a few small things we have to fix, like the headers and a couple other items in the next video, and then we can throw it in the car. What I want to show you is our tow rig for the week of Redwood Rally. Fortunately, my father-in-law has a nice camper and truck, and he's allowing us to use it for the week, so we can sleep in the lap of luxury with a shower and toilet and everything. The only issue is that his stock hitch is not quite rated with a hitch extension to tow the car trailer with all the tools and everything we're going to have in it. So the idea is I bought a Class 5 hitch on Dodges. They are welded in this era. So what you do is you buy an aftermarket one, and it actually bolts underneath the stock one. So I'm going to make a super truss. If you are familiar with towing, you know that Torque Lift makes something called a super truss, which is basically 2 square tubes on top of each other that just allows weight to be supported with 2 receivers. So before we leave for the trip, we will be installing the receiver and making the truss and getting everything squared away. So I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe if you made it this far, and we'll see you next time.